delighted. It's my pleasure to welcome Pastor Nick Park, a founder of Solid Rock Church in Drogheda, to share with us a few words. And he wants to encourage Ireland to take a stand against racism. So can you please unmute Pastor Nick Park, and let's hear from him. You're welcome, Pastor Nick Park.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, and we can see you. Fantastic.
Good, I'm unmuted then.
How are you keeping?
I am fine. Let me tell you, over the years, there have been a lot of people who wished that they could mute me.
I bet so. How is Janice?
Janice is very well, thank you.
Very good, very good. Over to you, please.
Okay, yes. Ireland must take a stand against racism. To understand racism in Ireland, people of my generation, we grew up in an age whenever we were taught as children nursery rhymes and containing the N-word. We regularly would turn on our televisions and see the most offensive racist humor being portrayed as family entertainment. And yet what I found is that racism racism does not come naturally to the Irish, because as a people, we ourselves have been the victims of racism, certainly not to the extent of people from African descent, but we have been subject to racism in the past. Now, for me as a Christian pastor, of course, I believe that every human being is made in the image of God, and God is beautiful. So every human being is beautiful. A lot of Irish racism comes about through ignorance, and therefore it's not enough to just say take a stand against racism if we do not address that ignorance. I remember shortly after we started the Solid Rock Church in Drogheda, I'm going back now 26 years ago, we had a gospel choir came from the New Testament Church of God in Wolverhampton in England, all of Jamaican descent. And we took them down West Street in Drogheda. We went to get a burger, and people were taking photographs of us because there were many people in Drogheda at that time had never seen a black person before. They'd seen them on TV, but had not seen a black person live. And we were followed by this crowd of people who were phoning their friends to come down to West Street and see all these black people. And it was purely out of ignorance, because people had never experienced any of this before. And the fact is that whenever we encounter something that we haven't encountered before, we tend to take one of two responses. One is, I want to find out more. And the other is, I feel threatened by this new thing. And sadly, racism thrives when people take the response of feeling threatened by anything that is different or is new. Ireland in my lifetime has changed tremendously, but it still needs to change more. And one of the ways that we can do that, I believe, is by making sure that we teach our children history. I'm a great believer in the power of history well taught. And we need to teach our children about past experiences of racism, including the Irish being portrayed in many parts of the world as being violent, lazy, and alcoholic, including the Holocaust. I was delighted to hear David Gilroy mentioning Tommy Reichenthal. And I think the fact Tommy's work in schools in Ireland is going to be of benefit to every community in Ireland as he shares the consequences of racism in Germany in the 1930s and the 1940s. Also the stories of the civil rights movement. You know, when we understand this history and see the terrible results of dehumanizing language, then it enables us to take a firmer stand for it in our own country. And also the awareness that joking, saying something hurtful and then saying, oh, but I'm only joking, is not acceptable. That humor is not an excuse for people to belittle or dehumanize or try to diminish other people's humanity. I was absolutely delighted in just the last couple of weeks to see humor being used in a positive way. whenever Gemma O'Doherty and others held a demonstration on Blackrock Beach in Dundalk, and were totally upstaged by some young lads who used humor to basically expose how ludicrous they were behaving. These lads were doing a demonstration and shouting through a megaphone, "We can be ridiculous too." And I thought it was a wonderful example of how humor can be used to heal instead of to divide. Now, one of the things that we have to do if we are going to take a stand against racism is, when we recognize that racism has roots in ignorance, that we give people room to change. I was accused this week when I put on my Facebook feed that I was going to be, was honored and humbled to be at this event. I was admonished that I should not jump on the PC anti-racism bandwagon. Well, the people who told me that, I reminded them that the first anti-racist event I attended was in 1978, when I attended a Rock Against Racism event in Brockwell Park in Brixton in England. There was 120,000 of us attended that event. So I said, well, I've been on this bandwagon for 42 years. But I had to then ask, what is so wrong with jumping on a bandwagon? If people want to change, we should celebrate that change. And if we are truly to say that Ireland takes a stand against racism, then I really appreciate what David Gilroy said, that when people have questions, even if those questions sound stupid and ignorant, that we should not mock people for asking them, but try to bring them into a better place. Because people can change. You know, when I see somebody like Justin Trudeau being mocked for ostracized because he wore blackface many years ago, rather than using that as a stick to beat him with, we should actually say, isn't it wonderful that he's changed and would no longer do something like that? And by the way, I spoke just 2 days ago with a young Irish woman in her 20s who told me how, as a child, she participated in the St. Patrick's Day parade wearing blackface in order to raise money for Trocheri. And there was certainly no malice intended at all. And she suddenly realized, imagine if that photo became public, how that could be used against me and what people could think of me. So I think we should give room for people to change, create activities and opportunities for people to change their perspective. And so we need to send out a message loud and clear that racism is totally unacceptable, but we also need to give people the room and the space and the encouragement to be able to change their perspectives. We experienced this as a church in Drogheda. We went from being a church that was 100% white Irish to being a multicultural church. And that did not happen overnight. And it did not happen without some very serious conversations and some heartaches and some squealing and crying from certain people. But thank God, some of the people who squealed the loudest at the time are now people who are members of the church and enjoying wonderful fellowship with brothers and sisters in the church from all nationalities. But part of the way that we changed that church was by basically creating space and opportunities for people to come together and to share. Very simple things, like when we did a baby dedication, encouraging white Irish people to become godparents to children of asylum seekers, and watching how that then created up a whole series of interactions that totally changed people's perspectives on what they had previously thought to be true. So I just want to say that yes, Ireland must take a stand against racism, but we need to do it in a way that will not shame people for their past ignorance, but give them an opportunity to become better. And of course, as a Christian pastor, you would expect me to believe in redemption. And I believe that redemption is every bit as much a part of the message against racism as it is also part of the Christian gospel. So look, thank you again. I'm honored and humbled to be a part of this event today. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Pastor Nick Pack, it's just been fantastic listening to you there, with all the different suggestions you've made. And the one that really stood out for me is the one where you said to give people the opportunity to change, you know, give them the chance to change. Because if we're constantly just harping on about the mistakes that have been made in the past, when changes begin, we wouldn't see them. We would just be focused on the mistakes that were made in the past. And I loved what you also said about having an Irish person be godmother to, or godparents to the children of asylum seekers. That's a practical example, because then they get to understand the people better. And this also counts for integration, supporting integration, helping people to integrate even better, and creating that platform to better understand the other cultures that are present here in Ireland. Thank you so much for sharing those wonderful thoughts and those wonderful solutions from your end there.